Your kidney is gone, Carolyn. The surgeon's words didn't make sense. I was still foggy, emerging from anesthesia like surfacing from deep water. My throat was raw. The recovery room smelled like antiseptic and something chemical I couldn't name. Dr. Hendricks stood at the foot of my hospital bed, his face serious in a way that made my chest go tight. "What do you mean, gone?" My voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "During the routine laparoscopic examination, we discovered your left kidney had been surgically removed. Recently. Within the past 6 months, I'd estimate. The incision site is healing, but it's unmistakable." The room tilted. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them without understanding why. 1, 2, 3. My hands found the blanket, and I realized I was holding it so hard my knuckles had turned white. I forced myself to release it. This was supposed to be a simple procedure. A diagnostic laparoscopy to check for endometriosis. In and out. My sister Mia had driven me to the hospital that morning. She'd sat in the waiting room with her phone, probably texting, probably not thinking about anything important. She'd promised to pick me up at noon. "How is that possible?" I managed to ask. "I would know if someone removed my kidney." Dr. Hendricks pulled a stool closer to my bed. "Not necessarily. If you were under anesthesia when it happened, you wouldn't remember. And if the person who performed the surgery was skilled, the scarring could be minimal. You might have attributed any pain or discomfort to other things." My mind was scrambling, trying to piece together the last 6 months. When had I last felt completely normal? There had been that pain in my left side around March. I'd mentioned it to Mia during one of our weekly coffee dates. She'd suggested it was probably just a muscle strain from my new job. I'd agreed. The pain had faded. I'd forgotten about it. The hospital room felt too small. The machines beeped steadily around me, monitoring my vitals. My heart rate was climbing. Dr. Hendricks noticed. "We need to run more tests," he said quietly. "We need to understand how this happened and when. This is a serious matter, Carolyn. This is organ trafficking. This is a crime." I couldn't speak. The words organ trafficking echoed in my head like they belonged to someone else's life. Someone else's body. Not mine. Not my body, which I'd always taken for granted, which had always been simply mine to inhabit and use as I saw fit. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Dr. Hendricks asked. I shook my head slowly. The movement made my head spin. The anesthesia was still in my system, making everything feel dreamlike and impossible. But it was happening. It was real. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. A text from Myelina. "Running late, traffic is insane. Be there in 20. I stared at the message for a long time without responding. The first thing I did after Dr. Hendricks left was call the police. The officer who arrived at the hospital took my statement in a small consultation room off the main hallway. His name was Pedion Arnold, and he had the kind of face that had seen too much. He didn't seem surprised by what I was telling him. That somehow made it worse. "Has your sister had any financial problems?" he asked, writing in a small notebook. "Not that I know of. She's a real estate agent. She makes decent money." "Any medical issues? Anything she might need money for?" I thought about Mia, my younger sister by 3 years. We'd grown up together in a small house in Portland, shared a bedroom until I was 14. We'd been close once. Not anymore. Not really. Over the past few years, our relationship had become something that existed mostly out of obligation. We had coffee once a week because we were supposed to. We called on birthdays because that's what sisters do. But I couldn't imagine her doing this. I couldn't imagine anyone doing this. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think so." "We'll need to investigate." Officer Arnold said. In the meantime, I'd recommend not confronting your sister until we have more information. This is an active investigation now. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't sit in that hospital bed and pretend everything was normal while my sister picked me up and drove me home like nothing had happened. The rage was building inside me, hot and sharp, pushing against my ribs. When Mialina arrived, I was dressed and ready. My discharge papers were in my lap. Dr. Hendricks had given me a folder with copies of my imaging, the evidence of what had been taken from me. I held it against my chest as Mialina walked into the room, her face bright with the kind of fake concern that suddenly looked sinister. "Hey, how are you feeling?" she asked, leaning down to hug me. I didn't hug her back. I couldn't. If I touched her right now, I was afraid of what I might do. "We need to talk," I said. Her smile faltered. "Okay, let's talk in the car. I'm parked in the loading zone." The drive to my house took 15 minutes. Mialina drove a silver Lexus that she'd bought 2 years ago. I remembered her showing me the photos when she first got it, proud of herself for the purchase. She'd gotten a good deal, she'd said. A steal, really. She'd been in a great mood that day. I sat in the passenger seat and watched her hands on the steering wheel. These were the hands that had held me when I was born. These were the hands that had braided my hair when I was 7. These were the hands that had signed me into a hospital for a routine procedure and then done something unspeakable to me while I was unconscious. "Did you sell my kidney?" I asked quietly. The car swerved slightly. Mialina's hands jerked on the wheel. She pulled over into a parking lot and put the car in park. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She stared out the windshield at the gray Portland afternoon. "How did you find out?" she whispered. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. There was a roaring in my ears that made everything else sound distant and muffled. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why would you do that?" Mialina turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I didn't recognize. Desperation, fear, something broken. "I owed money," she said. "A lot of money, to people who don't accept excuses. They said they could help me. They said they knew someone who needed a kidney, and they could match me with a donor. They said the donor would be compensated. They said it was all legal, all above board. They said—" "Stop," I said. "Stop lying to me." "I'm not lying. I'm explaining." "You're lying," I said, my voice rising. "You knew it wasn't legal. You knew what you were doing was wrong. You knew it was me. You brought me to the hospital. You told me it was routine. You let them put me under anesthesia, and then you let them take my kidney." Mialina's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice. You made the wrong one." She reached for me, but I pulled away. I opened the car door and got out. We were in a parking lot behind a strip mall. It was cold. The wind cut through my thin hospital gown and the sweatshirt I'd thrown on over it. "Carolyn, wait!" Mialina called from the car. I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away from her, away from the car, away from the reality of what she'd done. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Officer Arnold. We've made an arrest. Your sister is being brought in for questioning. We found evidence on her phone of communications with a black market organ trafficking ring. We need you to come to the station and make a formal statement." I stood in the parking lot behind a strip mall in Portland, Oregon, and read those words. My sister was being arrested. My sister had sold my kidney to a criminal organization. My sister had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. I called a taxi. I went to the police station. I gave my statement. I answered questions. I provided the medical records. I explained how my sister had driven me to the hospital, how she'd told me it was routine, how I'd trusted her. The detective who took my formal statement was a woman named Hanayeta Snyder. She had kind eyes and a gentle way of asking questions that somehow made the whole thing easier and harder at the same time. "We've been investigating this ring for 8 months," she told me. "Your case is one of 12 we've identified so far. 12 people who had organs removed without their knowledge or consent. Your sister wasn't the broker. She was just the facilitator. There's a man named Geoton Graham who's been running the operation. He targets vulnerable people who need money. He promises them a cut of the proceeds from the sale. Then he recruits them to bring in family members or friends for routine procedures at hospitals, where he has people on the inside." "How many people work for him?" I asked. "We're still uncovering that. But we know of at least 5 people at your hospital alone. A nurse, a surgeon, an anesthesiologist, an administrator, a records clerk. They all have financial incentives to participate. The hospital, the place I'd trusted with my body, the place where I'd signed consent forms for a diagnostic procedure, and instead had an organ removed without my knowledge. The investigation took months. Mielina was charged with organ trafficking, conspiracy, and fraud. The other people at the hospital were arrested. Geoton Graham was found in a safe house in Seattle and extradited back to Oregon to face charges. But knowing who had done it didn't make it better. Knowing why didn't make it better. Nothing made it better. I went back to work 2 weeks after the surgery. My job was in marketing for a tech company. I sat at a desk and looked at spreadsheets and tried to pretend that my life hadn't fundamentally changed. But it had. Everything had changed. I was down 1 kidney. The doctor said I could live a normal life with 1 kidney. Millions of people did, but it wasn't the same. Every time I felt a twinge in my side, I wondered if it was my remaining kidney struggling. Every time I got tired, I wondered if it was because my body was working harder to filter waste. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the scars from the surgery, small marks that told the story of what had been taken from me. The worst part was the violation. It wasn't just that my kidney was gone. It was that someone I loved, someone I'd trusted completely, had made the decision to take it. She'd made that choice for me. She'd decided that her debt was worth more than my bodily autonomy. She'd decided that I was a resource to be exploited. 3 months after my surgery, I went to the courthouse for Mielina's sentencing. She'd taken a plea deal, 12 years in federal prison. The prosecutor had recommended 15, but Mielina's lawyer had argued that she'd been coerced, that she'd been under duress from the people she owed money to. I sat in the gallery and watched my sister walk into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished. She didn't look at me. The judge read the charges: organ trafficking, conspiracy, wire fraud, aggravated assault. The list went on and on. When the judge asked if Mielina had anything to say, she stood up slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate, and I made a choice that I can never take back. I hurt the person I love most in this world. I violated her trust and her body. I deserve to be punished for that. I accept whatever sentence this court gives me." She didn't look at me. She didn't try to make eye contact. She just stood there and accepted her punishment. The judge sentenced her to 12 years. Mielina was led out of the courtroom. I watched her go, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. I didn't know if I would ever forgive her. But it was something like closure. Something like an ending. Except it wasn't an ending. It was just a pause. 6 months after the sentencing, I was still struggling. I'd started seeing a therapist, a woman named Ilana Goodwin, who specialized in trauma. She helped me understand that what had happened to me was a specific kind of violation that had a name: medical trauma. It was the betrayal of trust, combined with a violation of bodily autonomy. It was the knowledge that the people who were supposed to care for me had instead used me. How do you move forward from that? I asked her during one of our sessions. You acknowledge it, she said. You process it. You decide what your relationship with your sister is going to be. You decide what kind of life you want to build going forward. I don't know if I can have a relationship with her, I said. You don't have to, Ilana said. That's your choice. But you do have to decide what her absence means to you. I thought about that a lot. What Mialina's absence meant to me. She was in federal prison in California. I could visit her if I wanted to. She'd sent me letters, which I'd mostly left unopened. She'd called, and I'd mostly declined the calls. But she was still my sister. She was still the person who'd braided my hair when I was 7. She was still the person who'd held my hand when our mother died 5 years ago. But she was also the person who'd sold my kidney. I decided to visit her. I didn't decide this lightly. It took me 3 months of therapy to work up the courage. But I needed to see her face to face. I needed to ask her the questions that the courtroom hadn't allowed me to ask. The prison visiting room was cold and institutional. There were tables and chairs bolted to the floor. There were guards watching from the corners. There were other families visiting other inmates, their conversations creating a low murmur of sound that filled the space. Mialina came out in her orange jumpsuit. She looked worse than she had at the sentencing. Prison had hollowed her out. Her face was gaunt. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like a stranger wearing my sister's face. We sat across from each other at one of the bolted-down tables. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Thank you for coming," Mialina said finally. "I need you to tell me everything," I said. "I need you to tell me how this happened. I need you to tell me exactly what you did and why you did it." Mialina took a shaky breath. "I owed money to some people. Bad people. They loaned me $50,000 for a real estate investment that went bad. They said if I didn't pay them back by a certain date, they would hurt me. They said they would hurt you too. So, you decided to sell my kidney instead." "No, that's not what happened. They came to me with the option. They said they knew people who needed organs. They said they could pay me $100,000 if I could get them a kidney. They said they'd already found a buyer. They said it was a simple procedure. They said the donor would be compensated." "Compensated?" I repeated. "I wasn't compensated, Mialina. I was stolen from." I know that now. I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought it was something different. I thought it was..." She stopped, and tears began to run down her face. "I thought it was something else. I didn't understand that it was you. I didn't understand that you would find out." "How could you not understand that I would find out?" I asked, my voice rising. "How could you possibly think I wouldn't notice that I was missing a kidney?" "They told me you wouldn't. They said the surgery was clean. They said there wouldn't be any complications. They said you'd feel a little pain in your side, and you'd probably think it was something else. They said the scarring would be minimal. They said..." "Stop," I said. "Stop making excuses. You knew what you were doing was wrong. You knew it was a crime. You knew it was a violation. And you did it anyway." Mialina was sobbing now. Other inmates and their visitors were looking at us. The guards were watching more closely. "I was scared," Mialina whispered. "I was so scared. I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me for help, I said. You could have told me you were in trouble. You could have let me decide what to do about it. You could have done anything but this. I know. I know that now. I know it every single day. I wake up in this cell and I think about what I did to you. I think about how I betrayed you. I think about how I violated you. And I can't take it back. I can never take it back. I sat there and listened to my sister apologize. I listened to her explain her motivations and her fears and her regrets, and I realized that none of it mattered. None of it would give me back my kidney. None of it would undo the violation. None of it would restore my trust in her or in anyone else. I need you to know something, I said. I need you to know that I forgive you. Mialina looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. I don't forgive what you did, I continued. I don't forgive the violation or the betrayal, but I forgive you as a person. I forgive you for being weak and scared and desperate. I forgive you for making a terrible choice. But I can't have you in my life. I can't be your sister anymore. I just can't. I understand, Mialina said. I understand, and I'm sorry. I stood up. The visit was over. I didn't have anything else to say to her. The drive back to Portland took 6 hours. I cried for the first hour, and then I didn't cry anymore. By the time I got home, I felt emptied out. I felt like I'd gone through something and come out the other side of it, though I wasn't sure what the other side looked like yet. A year after the surgery, I was in a better place. Not healed. I didn't think I would ever be completely healed, but better. I'd started running again, carefully, making sure my remaining kidney was getting enough water and oxygen. I'd started dating again, which was terrifying because it meant trusting someone new. I'd started rebuilding my life in a way that didn't include my sister. The other victims of the organ trafficking ring were also rebuilding their lives. We'd connected through a support group, and we met once a month to talk about our experiences and our recoveries. There were 12 of us. 12 people who'd had organs stolen from them. 12 people who'd been violated in the most intimate way possible. One of them, a man named Calic Alvarez, had lost both a kidney and part of his liver. He was on a waiting list for a transplant. Another woman, Cita Avila, had lost a kidney and had developed complications that required ongoing medical care. Another man, Milton Gonzalez, had lost a kidney and had suffered a stroke 6 months later, which his doctors believed was related to the stress on his remaining kidney. We were all damaged. We were all carrying the weight of what had been taken from us. But we were also all survivors. We were all still here. We were all still fighting. Giaton Graham was convicted on 47 counts of organ trafficking, conspiracy, wire fraud, and aggravated assault. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. The surgeon who'd performed the procedures was sentenced to 20 years. The nurse who'd coordinated the surgeries was sentenced to 15 years. The others received varying sentences. But none of that brought back what had been taken from me. None of that restored what had been violated. 2 years after the surgery, I was living in a new apartment in a different neighborhood. I'd changed jobs. I'd changed my phone number. I'd changed my life in ways both large and small. I was trying to move forward. I didn't visit my sister again. She'd written me letters from prison, and I'd read some of them. She talked about her work in the prison library. She talked about the other inmates she'd befriended. She talked about how much she missed me. But I couldn't respond. I couldn't maintain that connection. The wound was still too fresh. My therapist, Ilana, helped me understand that this was okay. That I didn't owe my sister anything. That my healing was more important than maintaining a relationship with the person who'd violated me. "What do you want your life to look like?" she asked me during one of our final sessions together. "I want to feel safe again," I said. "I want to trust people again. I want to not feel like my body is something that can be taken from me at any moment." "Those are achievable goals," Ilana said. "They're going to take time, but they're achievable." And she was right. Slowly, over months and then years, I started to feel safer. I started to trust people again. I started to see my body as something that belonged to me, something that was whole and mine and protected. 3 years after the surgery, I was in a relationship with a man named Johnny L. Lee. He knew about what had happened to me. I'd told him on our third date because I needed him to understand that I was damaged in ways that weren't immediately visible. He'd listened without judgment. He'd held my hand. He'd told me that my past didn't define me, and I'd believed him. We moved in together a year later. We talked about getting married. We talked about the future, and for the first time since the surgery, I felt like I had a future that was worth looking forward to. The support group continued to meet. We'd become more than just survivors of a crime. We'd become friends. We'd become a community. We celebrated each other's victories and mourned each other's setbacks. We held each other up when the weight of what had happened threatened to pull us under. Milton Gonzalez had recovered well from his stroke. He was working again, teaching high school history. Chita Avila had started a non-profit organization to help organ trafficking survivors. Calic Alvarez had finally received a transplant and was doing well. And I was working as a patient advocate at a hospital, helping people navigate the medical system and understand their rights. I was using my experience to help others. I was turning my trauma into something meaningful. 4 years after the surgery, I was standing in my apartment with Johnny, looking at a diamond ring that he'd just put on my finger. He'd proposed on a hiking trail in the Columbia River Gorge at sunset, with the river spread out below us like a promise. I thought about my sister in her prison cell in California. I thought about the choice she'd made. I thought about how that choice had changed everything. And I realized that I'd moved on. I'd healed. I'd built a life that was full and meaningful and beautiful. My sister's betrayal was still a part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. It wasn't the ending. The ending was this. I was alive. I was healthy. I was loved. I was strong. The ending was that I'd survived. Today, 5 years after the surgery, I'm married to Johnny. We're talking about having children, which my doctors say is possible, though it will require careful monitoring. I'm still working as a patient advocate, and I've expanded my work to include training hospital staff on how to identify and prevent organ trafficking. The support group still meets. We've added new members as new cases have been uncovered. The investigation into the organ trafficking ring has expanded to include operations in other states. The work is ongoing. My sister is still in prison. She has 8 more years left on her sentence. I don't visit her anymore. I don't read her letters. I've made peace with the fact that she's my sister, and I've also made peace with the fact that she's no longer a part of my life. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. I've learned that moving forward doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. I've learned that my body belongs to me, that my choices matter, that my voice matters, that my story matters. If you're reading this and you've experienced medical trauma, know that you're not alone. Know that healing is possible. Know that your body belongs to you, and no one has the right to take from you without your consent. Know that speaking up matters. Know that your story matters. Reach out to a trusted person. Tell someone what happened. Get help. You deserve it. Subscribe for the next chapter. It's worth it.